Welcome, one and all, to the American Folklife Center's symposium, Traditional Folklore in a Digital World. My name is Stephen Winnick, and I'm a folklife specialist here at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. I'm here with several other library staff members, John Fenn, Michelle Stefano, Theodosia Austin, and Elizabeth Schreiber Byers, and you may hear from any or all of us before this is over. I will say that 2 weeks back, we had a thunderstorm knock John off of a webinar that he was hosting. So anything can happen, but we are going to be prepared if it does. We're all in different locations, which is an interesting thing about the virtual world. So today's panel will be about social media, and it features four wonderful social media leaders who work in the folklore realm. Dee Dee Cheney, a creator of the Twitter hashtag event Folklore Thursday and related media. Sarah Clito and Brittany Warman, creators of the award-winning Carter Hall School of Folklore and the Fantastic, which also maintains blogs, a Facebook page, and an online community. And Andy Paciorek, an artist and writer who created the Folk Horror Revival Facebook community and Word Harvest Press. So to tell you a little bit about us, the American Folklife Center was created by the United States Congress in 1976 and placed here at the Library of Congress to preserve and present American folklife. We preserve folklife through our archive of folk culture, which has millions of items of cultural documentation, including field recordings of traditional songs and music going back to 1890. And these include songs of Native and Indigenous Americans, old ballads that came over from Britain, African American work songs, spirituals, and blues, the first ever recordings of Korean music, and ethnic music of European, African, Asian, and other groups. So it's an extremely diverse collection. We also have hundreds of thousands of photos, manuscript pages, and oral history interviews, including the narratives of formerly enslaved Americans recorded in the 1930s and 1940s, and the oral histories of the Veterans History Project, the Civil Rights History Project, and StoryCorps, among many others. So that's how we preserve folklife. We present folklife through public programming, including a concert series, a lecture series, and a symposium series, of which this is a part. Of course, the audio we were listening to was part of our concert series, that Lone Pignon concert. We conduct training in ethnographic field methods, another way that we help present folklife, and we have a range of publications. And in the current century, we have been making the shift from paper publications to online publications, social media, and other digital forms. And it's been one of my projects here at the center in the 16 years that I've been here. I'm the last remaining staff member who was on our original AFC Facebook team, which was founded in the later part of 2008 and started actually posting in 2009. And then I founded our blog and our podcast, which are both called Folklife Today. And you can find all of these products and services at our website and our blog, which are loc.gov/folklife and blogs.loc.gov/folklife. And we'll pop those URLs into the chat. So the idea for this symposium came about 2 or 3 years ago. It was pre-pandemic when we actually gathered in rooms at the Library of Congress on Capitol Hill. So there's been a delay of a year during which we didn't do much symposium programming. But in that time, we learned to do webinars like this. And I think it's very appropriate that one of our first online symposia should be about online folklore. So in creating this symposium, we're recognizing that people all over the world use the internet as their first recourse to get news, information, commentary, and opinion, as well as entertainment. And while this sometimes involves websites of traditional media or even august institutions like the Library of Congress, it also encompasses a wide range of digital media, such as podcasts, blogs, Facebook and Twitter, TikTok, and other things that we'll talk about today. And this is true of all kinds of information, including folklore. Folklore is a favorite subject of many popular social media projects. So in addition to the American Folklife Center's work in social media, the online and digital realm has attracted quite a bit of folklore scholarship. And in a general sense, I'd say that the scholarship on folklore and social media tends to focus on emergent forms. So the world building aspects of conspiracy universes, including QAnon, which thrive in online forums, or storytelling that occurs through Twitter and relies on the appearance of being an account of true happenings that happens to be conducted in tweets. And of course, Memes and their many uses are a big focus of folklore scholarship. Remember lolcats? It seems so long ago when they were big. So these emergent forms are quite fascinating, but it's also true that traditional folklore is spread, discussed, and performed or enacted in the online environment. Folk tales, legends, songs, and jokes. We've even done our annual Winter Mummers play as a podcast here at the American Folklife Center. So that's just an example of traditional folklore being carried on through digital media. So we've decided to pursue panels on traditional folklore in 2021, and we hope to hold a later symposium to look at emergent forms. So in inviting these fascinating speakers that we have today, we are recognizing that many podcasts and social media sites that are about folklore present compelling content, and then they back it up with savvy online marketing. And some of these sites have earned their creative talent recognition as folklore experts and have spun off into published books, TV shows, and other media. So by engaging audiences across a range of media, creative professionals like these are helping to define what the public thinks of as folklore. And I think that's really important. So as a major public folklore institution in the United States, and one that in self engages in both podcasting and social media, we felt that the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress should be engaging with these leaders, learning from them and their experiences, and then allowing our audiences to meet and interact with them. And that was the inspiration behind these panels. Now, the inevitable administrative details. This event will last about 2 hours. I will introduce the speakers in turn, who will speak for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I'll probably ask one question to each speaker right after their talk, but in general, we'll hold Q&A to the end. After Sarah and Brittany speak, there will also be a brief break of less than 10 minutes, during which we'll play some podcast audio, but it'll allow you to get away from your screens for a few minutes. So as far as the question and answer goes, we're going to handle audience questions through Zoom's Q&A function. So you can type your questions into the window at any time. You just have to open the little Q&A window, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. Now, our Library of Congress staff members will be going through the questions and selecting questions to ask on behalf of the audience. We find that that's the most efficient way to handle this in a room with a lot of people in it. So we'll try to divide them fairly equally among the panelists, but we'll also be picking the questions that are the most relevant to folklore themes. Now, when you do ask a question in the Q&A, please say whom you're addressing, even if you type the question in during that person's presentation, because it will be sort of separated in our minds from the time that it was asked by the time we ask it back. So please type, for example, Andy, how did you decide on Facebook as a venue for your folklore interest? And that way we'll know if the question is directed to a particular individual. Finally, in addition to the Q&A, there is a chat function, and you may note that this is disabled for the audience. You can't chat with us yourselves, but that allows us to drop in links and information that we would like you to have. So otherwise, the links and things that we provide can tend to get buried in the chat if people are just saying, hey, how you doing? So that's why we do that. So I think that does it for the administrative details. And so we can move on, and I will introduce our first panelist, who is Dee Dee Cheney. And I'm going to confess that Dee Dee Cheney is one of the inspirations for this symposium, although in fact, all of these 4 people are among the inspirations for this symposium. But I had been aware of Folklore Thursday for a while, and sometimes hashtagged my own posts or those of the American Folklife Center in order to participate. But Folklore Thursday is an idea, I would say, of such sort of simple genius that if you're participating, you don't necessarily realize that there's just a couple of people behind it, right? It seems very grassroots, like a large number of people all over the world just decided to post folklore on Thursdays and hashtag their posts. But really, there was a small team behind thinking up Folklore Thursday. And I learned this when Dee Dee's first book came out, because, and the book is actually here, and the publicity for the book said that she was one of the founders of Folklore Thursday. And I thought, oh, how cool that is. And 2 other things struck me about the book. One was the title, which is a treasury of British folklore. And this reminded me that the former head of the folklore section here at the Library of Congress, Benjamin Botkin, was well known for a series of books called Treasuries of Folklore. And then looking closer at the book, I saw that it was published by the National Trust, a respected heritage preservation trust in the UK, and that their imprint is part of a larger publisher called Batsford, which published some of the standard popular works of folklore that I read back in graduate school by people like, for example, Jacqueline Simpson. And so it occurred to me that we might have first heard of the next Benjamin Bakken or the next Jacqueline Simpson, not in a university folklore department or through the Library of Congress, but on social media in a Twitter hashtag event like Folklore Thursday. And that's one of the realizations that led to these panels. So Dee Dee, as I said, is one of the founders of Folklore Thursday, which began as a Twitter hashtag day on which people all over the world post folklore related items, and then developed a website which they describe as an online magazine filled with top folklore articles from some of the best creatives and academics from around the world. Dee Dee is an archaeologist by training and has done many inspiring things, including volunteering with Berber girls in the high Atlas Mountains of Morocco during the Arab Spring. She now spends her time curating folklore from around the world for digital communities and writing and publishing books about folklore. So please welcome Dee Dee Cheney.
Hi, everybody, and thank you very much, Stephen, for that really kind introduction. I think you give me a lot more credit than I'm due there. We do have a massive community, and they deserve a lot of applause there. Okay, so we've had some fabulous music to get us all in the mood. It certainly cheered me up. I am in Liverpool at the moment and hoping that we don't have any seagull attacks, because that's our issue here right now. So I am Dee Dee Cheney, and I'm here today to talk to you about Folklore Thursday. So if we could go to the first slide, please, that'd be excellent. So yes, what is Folklore Thursday? So it was co-founded by myself, and I think it's always nice to tell you a little bit more about me, just so you get an idea of the perspective that I'm coming from, my own background, which is archaeology. I am really keen on landscapes and identity, and I do think that will come through. So you can view what I'm saying through that lens and grasp my assumptions from that too. The other co-founder is Willow Winsham, and she is a witchcraft historian. So she's more exciting than I am. She has much better branding. She specialises in English witchcraft cases, and we are both writers. We co-authored the Treasury of Folklore series from Batsford, and bit of a plug, you can find those in any good bookshop. So do go and pick those up if they sound of interest. So on to the point, what is Folklore Thursday? So first of all, Folklore Thursday is a Twitter hashtag day. So some people might be asking what that means. Many people. So people come from all over the world, really all over the world, actually, quite surprisingly. They come to Twitter every Thursday and they share their own blog posts, their pictures, traditions, all kinds of folklore snippets, and they just add hashtag Folklore Thursday. And then what that does is it brings it all into one feed in a central place around that hashtag. And there is a Folklore Thursday account on Twitter at Folklore Thurs, because Thursday was too long. And that account retweets as many as we can each Thursday. There are Twitter limits, so we're not able to retweet absolutely everything, but we do try to share as much as possible. And in essence, that's crowdsourcing folklore from all over the world in real time on social media. Secondly, we have a website now as well, and we have folklore articles from a lot of different contributors, again, from all over the world. But of course, it's not just Willow and I that run this. We have an amazing team. We have over 200 article contributors now. That's covering folklore experts, people from museums, galleries, artists, writers, all kinds of people. But even more behind the scenes there, we have a whole team of editors who help put up those articles. We have a tech team who are currently remaking the website. You may be very glad to know. We certainly are. And we have obviously the team of guest hosts who man the social media every Thursday. And we couldn't do any of this without them. So I couldn't fit them all onto a slide, unfortunately, But if you go to the website, we do have a team page there and you can have a look at all those people. And of course, there are the people who take part each week. So while there is the team behind the scenes, Folklore Thursday wouldn't exist without everybody who comes every week and shares their own folklore. It wouldn't be a thing. And it's become this global community. So it's not just me, it's not just Willow, it's not even just the team, it's kind of everybody involved. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we founded Folklore Thursday, which sounds very grand, but it didn't seem like that at the time, and still doesn't. And that was back in 2015, which is very long ago now. And when we did, we had these goals. We really wanted to create a space to have a conversation between diverse groups. And we loved the idea that in the past, people would come together and share stories around a fire, whether that's a campfire, I've done that with my own friends, or whether that's in a kitchen around a log burner or, you know, a stove. And I remember as a child, with my own family, it was a gas fire, so not quite as romantic, but sharing family stories around our own fire. And people have done that for so many centuries and, you know, thousands of years. And really we thought, well, actually social media is like a virtual fireside because everyone comes along, they share their stories. It's the modern equivalent. And it is now a place which is becoming more democratized. More people have got access to the internet. And so that means that people can come along and add their own voices to this conversation about folklore and share all of this stuff. Another thing we wanted to do was create a place to crowdsource info. Now, obviously, social media does that already. But we were quite aware that a lot of the material around folklore is quite inaccessible sometimes, or it used to be. You know, it can be locked away in universities. You might not go to university. Often it's in libraries in central cities, like in Britain, in London. You have to get a train there, it's really expensive. So we thought, you know, well, let's create a place where we can share facts, tales, but also public domain resources and the links to those places where people can find information and really try and improve access to folklore, along with some of the other brilliant people and institutions that are trying to do the same thing at the moment, because it is important. Next slide, please. So really, I wanted to talk today about what we do and how social media is different from kind of traditional folklore. So how is engaging with folklore on social media and what we do different to traditional folklore? So I think for me as a child, and I think for a lot of people in the past, you had visions of like dusty old men collecting superstitions from peasants in, you know, the middle of heaths and hills. And I think most people here now probably don't think that, which is quite good, I suppose, that we've moved away from that idea. And we know it's now know it's more about cultural heritage and group identity and those kind of things. So how is it different? And it is different in many ways, yet also it's the same in other ways too. So let me just expand on that a little bit. So firstly, social media in itself is a conceptual landscape, and that is filled with silos, or as we might say, folk groups, because they're the same thing. Silos is just digital speak for the same concept. And really on social media, people are connected more by ideas rather than connected by physical landscapes like they might have been before the internet. Now, before there's a riot and people come for me, we could sit and debate this for 2 weeks. How spatial are digital landscapes? And, you know, people will say, well, of course, there are real life folk groups in, you know, day-to-day life that are also ideas based. Of course there are, you know, interest groups. You know, I used to be a bit of a goth. That's also a folk group. You know, so it's not strictly true, but as a general rule, when we're on social media, we're not really usually congregating around physical spaces. People congregate around ideas. Okay, and secondly, with the existence of these silos, social media is also a contested landscape. People come from all kinds of places globally. They come from diverse backgrounds. And all of these people bring different perspectives and ideas. So social media, because of that, becomes a place where different versions of reality are debated. What is a truth? What's a truth for me? What's a truth for you? They're not always the same. And as we know on social media, if we've ever been on it, people don't agree. And that is an understatement. Social media is filled with debate. And a lot of the time, there's a battle for the ownership of that playing field. You know, there's conversation on Twitter, there's a row, and people want their ideas to be taken on board. Next slide, please. Thirdly, they are also landscapes of communication. Social media is a place where ideas and identities are negotiated because of all this. For example, national identities and national narratives, the things we believe about ourselves because we come from a certain place, and the stories we tell ourselves about those places are negotiated on social media. The Folklore Society in Britain had a conference about just that a few years ago, about stories like Boudica and King Arthur and why we tell them and what they say about us. And of course, it's not just our personal identity, we have our group identity, and then there's the interplay within that, and all that comes into play as soon as somebody goes on social media. So if we go back to the concept of the virtual fireside, Folklore Thursday also, in a nice way, has a group identity. You know, it's really nice the way people turn up on Thursday as if we are known to each other in real life. And, you know, you remember people, they become your friends. It's a real community. There is an identity. And within that, there are all these smaller groups of identities that come together. And as the discussions unfold, people bring their personal identities, their group identities, and with those identities, and this is the key, they bring their personal stories and they share their group culture with other people from all over the world, which is an opportunity that we've never had before social media existed in many ways. We're able to access so much more than we could when I was a child, before the internet was commonplace, and now you know how old I am. And this is how ideas and identities are being shared and reshaped and negotiated on the hashtag day each week. People tell their stories, they tell their traditions, and you see the similarities and the differences, and you can compare them with the stories and the traditions of others. And that in itself starts this big conversation. Next slide, please. So in terms of Folklore Thursday's focus, it's not just about collecting and interpreting folklore. We have to focus on specific aspects of this because we're on social media. So we focus on mainly creating a shared language. So what does that even mean? So first of all, you have to engage people in a conversation. They come along, you say hi, they share a post, that begins something. Then it's really important that there's a sense of mediating these conversations between diverse groups, especially when people don't agree. So because of that, it's really important to maintain and foster a safe space. There's so much bullying on social media. We see it within such a lovely community as Folklore Thursday. So it's really important that we feel that people are comfortable sharing such personal stuff. It's really meaningful stuff, folklore. It's about who you are. It's about who your family is, your community. And some of the stories are so beautiful. It has to be a safe space. So because of that, a big issue for us is looking at moderating versus gatekeeping. And this is one of the issues that we wrangle quite a lot, because we have to set up guidelines to be able to move the conversation forward and maintain that safe space and make sure everyone's okay and having fun, because that's what it's about. We have to do that without gatekeeping. We have to create this safe space without setting rules that are going to silence people. Now, okay, I mean, you know, if somebody's coming with one of the isms, racism, sexism, that kind of stuff, maybe that's not what we want in the conversation, and that's what these guidelines are for. But it's so easy to have these massive debates about what is okay to stop people saying, who's allowed to say what, who can tell which story. Cultural appropriation is such a huge thing. You know, it's quite a complex thing. Facilitating without gatekeeping and keeping people feeling happy, you know. So next slide, please. Okay, so how do we actually do that in practice? And I wanted to talk more about this than we've got like X amount of followers, you know, this happened, because I think this is more important for us, not for everybody. You know, different groups have different priorities, but I think for us, how we do this is really important. So firstly, we think about the power of words, and we really always try to use inclusive language. People always say, I sound American, and I wonder if it's because we've purposefully decided to call people folks. It is the folk, but we don't call them guys, because not everyone in the community is a guy. We use endonyms, not exonyms. So they're the words that people use to name themselves. They're not names that other people use for them. And those names that are imposed on people are often about wielding power over them and associated with colonialism. So it's really important to get those words right. We have to be careful with words like myth and legend, because something from a different culture, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, that's a myth, without meaning any offense by it. But sometimes you have to think about that and think, actually, that's somebody's sacred story. That's their beliefs. You know, it's really important to get those words right and show that level of respect for somebody else's traditions. That brings us on to the second point, though it's hard to get it right all the time. You know, we're not experts in everything. We're focused on being accountable, and it's really important to listen to that feedback for us. You know, somebody says that's not the right word, you have to apologize. You have to incorporate that into what you're saying and say to people, you know, someone said this isn't right, we need to fix this, and you make those changes. And that's really important on social media, because, you know, people are there in front of you having this conversation. So you have that opportunity to fix that right there. Also, we crowdsource the rules. We try not to make them. So, you know, people question us about, like, you know, what is folklore? Why have you split folklore into these categories? And we have to say that we don't make up the categories. It's too complex. We source them from academics, and any academics in the room will know how complicated it is, and all those debates about what is folklore, what isn't folklore. We wash our hands of that. We're not that clever. We leave that to other people, and we take their expertise and we try and incorporate that into what we do. Okay, so thirdly, we try to be allies and we promote diversity. We try to be accessible and inclusive because we believe that everyone has a voice. We also believe they have a right to use it, again, as long as they're not oppressing anyone else. So we very much try to share a range of folklore on the hashtag from all different places and people. We try to have website articles that cover all kinds of places in the world and represent as many groups as we can. But we also very much try to focus on people telling their own stories. And really, it's about us just facilitating that. It's not my place to tell other people's stories, it's theirs. And that's why we have this platform and this hashtag, because it is their place, it's their voice. They need a place to do that. And I think a lot of the time, people think that Willow and I are like magical people and we live in some kind of hobbit houses or something. And we're really not. It's absolutely the opposite. We just put the boring processes in place to make this happen. Everybody else they're the magical people. We just tap into it, we crowdsource it, and then we just concentrate it into one place. We don't bring that magic, they all bring that magic. So next slide, please. And on social media, those conversations happen in real time. And that's one of the most amazing things about social media. All this is happening right there, right then in front of you. And our hashtag hosts every week do this amazing, amazing job. It's so stressful when you've got like 50 or 60,000 people sharing tweets and you're trying to share everyone and make sure that, you know, everyone gets something shared. And it's really hard, and they do so well. But as well as sharing tweets, they're also mediating this crowdsourced conversation on the fly, right? So much pressure. And what they're doing, but when they do that, they're doing that within these contested landscapes, the contested landscape that is social media. It's such a hard thing to do, and we're so lucky to have such amazing people doing that with us. And we're watching folklore, and even the very definition of folklore being redefined in front of our eyes with these conversations happening in real time. What is folklore? Is that folklore? Can you say that? Can I say this? And you see it, and people are talking about it. And again, it's not us saying it, it's not us dictating the rules. This is just happening right there because there's a place for it. Next slide, please. And what these people do and what we facilitate is, in essence, digital storytelling, because they're telling their individual stories, their family stories, their community stories, and their stories of real people and real places. And while this is all happening, they're also writing the story of Folklore Thursday as a community. We don't write that, they write that, and that's an amazing thing to watch as well. And as each story is told and retold, the stories change. They're reshaped, they're reworked in real time in front of your eyes. And telling them on social media itself also changes them, because they're told as tweets. It's a different format. It's 140 characters, or it used to be. And those tweets can be linked together as threads. And the way that's put across, that also changes their very nature. So as these stories are retold and reshaped, they also kind of reshape who we are as tellers, but also as listeners. This changes how the traditions we share and we hear are perceived all over the world with this real-time conversation about folklore, sharing folklore, renegotiating what folklore even is on social media. And through this change, we kind of connect with others, and it helps form a conversation of intercultural dialogue that's happening right in front of us. So from that, we hope that the conversation on the hashtag day really helps people connect with others from other places, other communities, different kinds of backgrounds and different kinds of identities. And that's happening right here tonight. You know, we're across the world right now. And we hope that through this kind of communication, through this conversation, through this sharing and renegotiating of all this folklore, that the social media landscape itself might become a little bit less contested. Every time Folklore Thursday comes together as a community online and rewrites these stories and people have this conversation with other people across the world among themselves. So if we could go to the last slide, please, just to sum up quickly. Thank you. So in essence, we're about crowdsourcing voices. So what that means, it would be really great if you could also come along on Thursday, add your own voice to that conversation. Tell us what you're doing with folklore. Tell us what you think about this session and last week's session. So you can find me and Folklore Thursday on the links here in the screen. So that's at DD Cheney on Twitter and at Folklore Thurs on Twitter. And of course, there's the website, folklorethursday.com. And if you'd like to support Folklore Thursday, you can pick up our books from your local bookshop, preferably, or online. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for coming along today and listening about Folklore Thursday and why it's there and what we do and how we do it. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to all the organisers for such a brilliant series of events. Last week was fabulous. I'm sure today will carry on the same. So thanks so much to everyone.
Many thanks to you as well, Dee Dee. Thanks so much for that presentation. And as I mentioned, I'll ask sort of one question or throw an idea out there for you to talk about. I think it's really interesting how your discourse about Folklore Thursday draws both from the language of academia and the language of magic. I think that social media is a kind of magic in the sense that, I mean, if you're familiar, for example, with the comic book series Fables, in which their castle is entirely made up of rooms that are actually all over the universe in different worlds and different dimensions and on different planets, and so you walk from one room to another, and it's a magical space. And when the magic goes away, all of a sudden people who are adjacent to each other are millions of miles away from each other. And that's sort of the way social media works, right? Here we are, even this panel is made up of people who are actually in different countries of the world, and yet we appear to be in one space. So social media is kind of magic, but also you talked about the power of words, which is a very witchcrafty thing, but also, as you know, an important academic thing. As you say, what we call legends and what we call myths has an effect on how those things are perceived. So how do you see this interplay between the academic and the magical in the life of Folklore Thursday?
Oh, now there's a question. I'm going to use the word fraught. Okay, and I'm just going to be honest about this. It is fraught. It's really difficult because it's so hard to negotiate this space as intermediaries, because that's all I see us as. I mean, we have so many different parts of the community. We do have academics within the community, obviously, you know. We have artists, we have a lot of people from like pagan beliefs and all of these different groups. So for us, it's very much about not being in one camp, because folklore is so many things to so many different people. And again, with the naming, people have different names for all of these things. So it's really important for us that we share the reality of people's experience. So it's quite difficult sometimes because, you know, some people would say, well, you've shared something and it's not strictly folklore. And you say, yeah, but it's more about the essence and the experience that people are having with folklore and what they're bringing. And then some people say, you know, you can't use this word. We had quite an interesting debate online about the term folkloresque. Now, obviously, that's an academic term, and there's no offence meant with the term folkloresque. It's just something that is inspired by folklore, but not strictly conforming to the definition of folklore. But people in the community were quite upset by the word because they felt it somehow negated their experience of folklore and their response to that, as if their creative response wasn't valid. And that was a really important point for us, and we reflected on that quite a lot. And it was like, you know, okay, this is one experience of what this is that these people are doing, and this is a totally different experience. And it's magical, you know, people are creating songs and stories and artwork, and it's such a magical, immersive thing. It's a magical world. But for some people, it's not real folklore, it's not enough. And we just chose to never use that word again because we don't want to negate from people's experience. And we see it as a valid word, but it has its place. And I think really that answers, I hope that answers your question. All the bits have their place. And I think really it's about people's personal experience of that. And that's what we try to look at.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, it strikes me that these social media communities, unlike the communities that we're born into and live in, you know, in the physical world, are entirely voluntary. So you have to make a safe space because anyone can opt out. You can't opt out of the village you were born in and live in, but you can opt out of Folklore Thursday. So it's kind of interesting the imperative for creating that kind of environment. So thank you so much. And I think we're going to pass on to our next panelists, who are Sarah Clito and Brittany Warman. And they also are among, I mean, all of these people, as I said, are among the inspirations for this, but I've known them for quite a while. In fact, we were reminiscing about the earthquake that happened 10 years ago yesterday at the Library of Congress. And Brittany happened to be there at the library with us because she was an intern at the American Folklife Center at that time. So on that day that we all had to rush outside for the earthquake, Brittany was there. But Sarah and Brittany are the founders of the Carter Hall School of Folklore and the Fantastic, which is an award-winning online school that offers courses in folklore, creative writing, and related topics. They earned PhDs in English and folklore from Ohio State University in 2018 and MAs from George Mason University in 2012. And I got to know them during their George Mason period because that's close to us here at the Library of Congress. They've taught dozens of courses, they've won numerous awards, and they have dozens of academic and creative publications, both together and separately as individuals. In 2019, Carter Hall received the Dorothy Howard Prize from the Folklore and Education section of the American Folklore Society, an award that honors those who use folklore in educational settings in rich and meaningful ways, both within and outside the classroom. And in making the announcement, the section dubbed Carter Hall a folk school for the digital age. In addition to formal courses, Carter Hall spreads information and inspiration about folklore through a blog, a Facebook discussion group, a Twitter page, an Instagram account, and a YouTube channel. And they'll talk about some of their social media coming right up. So without further ado, Brittany Warman and Sarah Clito.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate that lovely introduction. So yes, I am Brittany Warman.
And I'm Sarah Clito.
And together we run the Carter Hall School of Folklore and the Fantastic. And we're going to talk a little bit about that merging of the digital and magic in our talk, especially because that's pretty much what we are focused on. So next slide, please.
Yeah, that was just such a great question, and my mind was immediately a whir because I swear that's what we spend like half of every day thinking about, literally.
Exactly.
So, yeah, really, really enjoyed that. Okay, so what is Carter Hall? So Carter Hall is a mostly online school, a folk school for the digital age. We used to do a lot more events live and in person before all of this. For all of 2020, 2021. We've done talks at the Renaissance Festival, at the Contemporary American Theater Festival, live talks at Profs and Pints, stuff like that. But the bulk of what we do actually has always been online, which was really lucky coming into 2020. We just kind of leaned harder into being online and offering everything that way. So we give lectures and we teach courses on all things related to folklore and the fantastic. And by the fantastic there, I think what we actually mean is kind of the folklore-esque, right? If we want to be technical about it. Our backgrounds are in folklore and in literature. When we were getting our PhDs, half of our committee was folklorists, half of them were 19th century literature specialists on our committees. So we kind of have a foot in both worlds, and I think that's definitely reflected in the kinds of things that we love to teach and talk about. So we aim to offer the kinds of courses that folks always wanted to take in college, but couldn't always make work with their schedules, majors, economic realities, geographic realities, social realities, you know, I mean, and also just the fact that there aren't that many folklore departments out there in the US, certainly. And there are, of course, wonderful folklorists scattered across many different universities, but there just aren't that many places that you can take a folklore class with a folklorist. And we wanted to do something to change that. And we'll talk a little bit more, or a lot more about that when we talk to you about the origins of the school and how this even happened. So our goal really is to make learning about folklore and also about literature joyful, fun, and relevant. Yeah, I mean, it sounds sort of trite to say, but we really do just want it to be fun. And we want to give people really good information at the same time. And I feel like that really just sums up a lot of what we do. Like we have kind of a casual style when we lecture most of the time, but it's also really important to us that what we're giving people is good stuff that's really backed up by research and careful curation. So basically, those magic schools that everyone's always reading about, basically, we like to think of in our heads as Carter Hall being kind of the online version of that and creating that kind of sense of a magical school, a magical community where everyone is welcome and everyone can learn a whole bunch of stuff about folklore.
Next slide, please. Briefly, we do want to acknowledge that the name is maybe a little difficult to say, but we chose it very specifically. So the name Carter Hall comes, as many of you probably know, this audience probably knows, comes from our favorite traditional ballad, Tamlin. It is the story of how this awesome young woman named Janet stood her ground against a fairy queen and saved her true love from a gruesome death. Carter Hall is the name of the land that belongs to Janet, and we figured that that was the perfect name for a folklore school because it was the land belonging to a fierce, clever folklore heroine. It's also important to us that we had a name that really acknowledged traditional folklore as we move into this very new concept of this digital folklore school.
And on a less lofty note, we liked that it sounded kind of like hall at the end, like Carter Hall, almost like as if you could go to a building that had a school in it. So exactly. It's a bit of a stretch, but that's part of why that word, I think, stuck with us.
Exactly. And if you take a look at our logo, we have many little nods to Tamlin in it. Rosebush, the text, if you zoom in very closely, you can see that it's the beginning of Tamlin. I forbid you, maidens all, is written on the book there. And it's all about, that sort of merging of the traditional with the digital contemporary stuff. Next slide, please.
Okay, so how did this happen? How did we decide that this was a good idea to do with our lives? So in many ways, Carter Hall really was inspired by social media and grew out of social media. The vast majority of our content actually isn't transmitted over social media. We do most of our lectures and our talks via crowdcast to like a closed group of students, but like a ton of stuff still does take place on social media, and it really just wouldn't have happened without it. So basically, back when we were halfway through grad school, I don't even know, really in the thick of it, we taught courses at Ohio State University, which is where we were getting our degrees. And we loved teaching. Like we just immediately fell in love with teaching, which was frankly a little bit unexpected for me in particular, because I'm terrified of public speaking, and yet here we are. But we both really, really loved it. We loved connecting with our students. We loved sharing just information about folklore. It was constantly blowing their minds. They would get so excited, and then we would get so excited, and then we would, of course, like all good millennials, rush to Facebook, which was our social media platform of choice at the time, still kind of is, and would write frantically about it to all of our friends, and just how excited we were that they were excited, and talking about what we were going to teach the next day, crowdsourcing ideas for extra selkie stories that we hadn't thought of, things like that. And people would make comments over and over again saying, I wish I could take a class like that. I wish that they'd had classes like this when I was in college. I wish I could afford to go back to college and take classes like this. Comments like that. And it was just such a volume that it just kind of stuck in our heads. And at first we didn't really, take any of it seriously. We were just like, oh, it's so cool that people care about folklore. This is really great. And then we started thinking more about the academic job market, and we could talk about that for several hours, but we're not going to. We'll just say that it is a rough terrain right now, and it's forcing more and more folklorists and people in all disciplines, especially in the humanities, to really start thinking outside of the box. And if I'm being totally honest, when the idea for Carter Hall really solidified in our minds, we were actually at a conference in the UK, and we were jet lagged, just completely out of our minds, and couldn't sleep, and should have been sleeping because we had a conference presentation to give at, like 9 a.m. the next morning. And instead, we were lying in our little two like twin beds in our hotel room. And we were just talking about how much we loved teaching, and about how much we loved folklore, and how we really hoped we would get to teach forever. And then one of us just kind of screamed at the ceiling in the darkness, "We should have our own school." And then, of course, the response was to start cackling wildly, because that's ridiculous. And then we decided to try it anyway and just see what would happen. So I guess this was now almost 5 years ago. We tried doing just a teeny tiny pilot online. I think we had maybe 15 students, and we taught a course about, folklore associated with Halloween. And we've loved it, and we've never looked back.
But that course was exclusively talked about on social media. We were like,
Yep.
Hey, is anybody interested in this? Would you like to join a course like this? What kind of things would you be interested in? And that's how we developed that first course.
Exactly. It was basically, the topic was crowdsourced on social media. And like I said, that first pilot had 15 students in it, and that's not sustainable long term if it's going to be your full-time job. So the question was, how do you get the word out about an online school, and how do you make it sustainable and even thriving? And the answer for us was really social media. Next slide, please.
So yes, the answer is social media, and every kind of social media you can imagine, which is pretty funny for us. As Sarah mentioned, we were pretty much exclusively Facebook people, and exclusively with people we knew, kind of. We weren't really branching out into all the different areas of social media. We had, like a couple posts on Instagram maybe, and a couple tweets that we did during conferences with the conference hashtag. Maybe we participated in Folklore Thursday every once in a while. But the vast majority of what we were doing online was really just, occasional Facebook posts to our friends. But we realized that in order to make something like Carter Hall work, we really had to embrace social media, because that was the best way that we could see to connect with people who loved folklore, and who might be interested in the kinds of stuff we would offer as a school of folklore and the fantastic. So Carter Hall truly lives because of its community, and the community lives because of social media. The way that people connect on social media is a huge part of how Carter Hall is able to survive. We have presence on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, Patreon, and TikTok, and which is ridiculous in many ways. It's hard to keep track of everything, but each of those venues has proved to be helpful in different ways, and it is shocking to see the way that you can connect with people across these platforms. So we decided, since we have presence all over the place, we decided that we were going to zero in on 3 for our talk today, to talk in particular about how we use Facebook, Patreon, and TikTok, mostly because TikTok is our new one and it is very funny. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that. Next slide, please.
We really just have no chill, Brittany. I didn't realize we were on that many platforms.
Oh yeah, we have no chill. We're on everything.
Checks out. All right. So as we mentioned previously, Facebook was really our home base before we started any of this. I think it was really the only platform that both of us had a lot of familiarity with, and it continues to be our main avenue, even as we've branched out into trying other ones, sort of with different degrees of intensity. Facebook, I think, is where we still really focus the majority of our efforts. And I feel so old saying that. I feel like Facebook is just no longer.
It's not cool anymore.
It's not cool anymore, but that's why we have TikTok now, which we will get to. So Facebook has been our main social media platform pretty much since the beginning. And more people find our community there every day, and they are really active. It's it's amazing. It's great. It can be kind of overwhelming sometimes to moderate. Dee Dee spoke at length about, trying to create a safe space and moderate and curate, but not gatekeep. And as she was talking, I was like, oh gosh, yes, all of this is all true. So echoing everything that she said. But as of right now, our Facebook group, our private closed general discussion group, has well over 2,000 members, and our Facebook page has over 15,000 followers. We also host a private Facebook group for each one of our courses, and those are out of control, but in a really, really wonderful way. People are incredibly active there. When we're running a live course, most of my full-time job is literally just to moderate the Facebook group, to read stuff, to respond to things, because we have hundreds of notifications in there daily. I think we tried to run one short class once without a Facebook group, and our students basically revolted. They were like, no, you have to have this for us. And we get it, because it's where they connect. It's where they get to have a voice and talk back to us, because during the classes, during the lectures, it's a lot of us talking to them. And we almost always do have a live chat running while we're talking, but it's still, by the nature of how things like Zoom and Crowdcast work, it's highlighting our faces and our words, even as we try and pay attention to their chats. But the Facebook group really provides them a space for them to be heard, to share their responses, to get to know each other, to share their responses to quests for the courses. Every week we give them a kind of challenge or reflection that we call a quest, and we always have threads where they can talk about their quests, which is so much fun to read. So these private Facebook groups really help foster a sense of community and help our students get to know each other. And we're delighted that so many people have made friends and connections through these groups that seem to be persisting far beyond Facebook, onto other platforms, and even into real space sometimes too. I don't know if real space is the right word to use. Meet space? No.
Yeah, meet space.
Meet space.
IRL.
IRL. Thank you, Brittany. So at this point in Carter House development, we even advertise on the platform, which is a whole thing.
Yes.
Yes.
You can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So these are just two images. This is an image of our private group and an image of our regular page for Carter Ha. As you can see, we have a lot of people who talk there. We have an announcement section where we talk about our courses and our new posts. And then a lot of things that are set up for our about section on the Facebook page. So the page is what people usually find if they search for us online. The discussion group is a little bit more for, I don't know, insiders, I guess, because that is the place where a lot of people just like talk to each other, many of whom are longtime Carter Hall students. So it's definitely been really interesting to see how these two places develop. It's much more about, it has become so much about becoming a real community, a real feeling of being in a school together in these spaces, which has been absolutely wonderful to see.
And it was such a surprise to us too. Like, I just don't think, when we started out, I mean, first of all, we had no idea what we were getting into or what we were going to create, but we never expected this kind of community to grow up around it in this way. And we have so many students and friends who have become such a crucial part of the community. We can't even imagine it without them. And that's just been, I think, the biggest surprise and the most wonderful thing to both of us about Carter Hall.
Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Patreon now. So if you're not familiar, Patreon is a little bit maybe less well known than sort of Facebook and Instagram and those kinds of social media platforms. But Patreon is a platform where patrons contribute funds at certain tiers for bonus materials and offerings from content creators. So basically what we do on Patreon is we have a special place for people who choose at a certain tier to donate to the making of Carter Hall on a monthly basis. And we offer those people sort of special insider things in order to participate in that way, or as a thank you for participating in that way. So through the Patreon, we're able to host like our fairy tale salons and a book club. So this is a way of offering like people who are really active in the Carter Hall community, really believe in our message, a way of offering them something extra, and also a way of getting sort of monthly funds to keep Carter Hall running, which has been the most an amazingly helpful thing to have. So it gives our students a way of participating in the community on a deeper level and a way of directly supporting the content that they love on a more regular basis. Next slide, please. So the biggest parts of our Patreon are these two things, which is the Patreon book club, where we read basically folklore-esque books, things like myth punk books, mythic literature, mythopoetic literature, whatever you wish to call it, stories that are somehow inspired by folklore and inspired by the kinds of folklore our community seems to really respond to. Every month we have a new book. The people in the book club read the book, and you can join for a certain amount at a certain tier on Patreon, and then you get access to the book club discussion on Crowdcast, where we have the chat going, where people can come up and talk about the book on screen. We'll call people up on screen, and again, it's a really fun community builder and something that brings us a huge amount of joy every month. The other one is our digital fairy tale salons, which is a new thing that we started offering a couple months ago. We have what that is basically inspired by the French salons of where people would get together and sort of co-write fairy tales and talk about fairy tales and basically just, have a huge fairy tale fan club, essentially. So what we do at the salons is we give everybody a quest every week or every month, sorry, and the people at that tier get to participate in the quest and come in and talk on a Zoom call where we all are on the screen together. It's a much smaller, close-knit group, and we talk about fairy tales, love on fairy tales, respond to the quest, share little bits and pieces of people's creative writing. For example, the salon that's coming up this week is all about sharing fairy tale poetry, inspired by various fairy tales and different, you can bring in poetry that you love, or you can bring in poetry that you've written yourself, and we all get together and talk about it and enjoy our love of fairy tales in that particular way.
The other main thing that we've been using Patreon for is kind of like sneak peek stuff. Like if we have a project in the works, they're the first ones to know. We've also occasionally done like really ridiculous things like sharing screenshots of us like texting each other as we're reading books for the book club. So they get to kind of see like teaser commentary behind the scenes before we actually do it.
Yeah, again, and that has proven a very fun way to engage with the community and make it, really share more of ourselves through this like special way. Next slide, please.
All right, so we caved and got TikTok. We were told that we had to, so we, very resentfully at first decided to give it a whirl, and we've really had fun with it. So I'm sure you've all heard of TikTok at this point. Basically, it's had absolutely massive growth in the last couple of years. There are around 1 billion active users, which is ridiculous. We were pretty hesitant about this one because it's a video-based platform, and we do tons of videos all the time as, lectures and presentations and stuff, but it seemed, I don't know, kind of exhausting to us, the idea of making tons of tiny videos, but actually it's been really fun. Also, we were hesitant because TikTok is often seen as a place for much younger people, but in reality, about a quarter to a third-ish of the users are indeed over 30. And we have really, we can probably go ahead to the next slide, please. we've enjoyed TikTok a lot because I think it really lends itself to our kind of casual tone and impulses towards the ridiculous, I might even say. So we get to make, really silly videos. We get to, do a 1 minute video where we fire off like every definition of folklore that we can think of, in a minute and see how many we can cram in there. We can do videos of us collapsed on the floor after doing 2 back-to-back lectures, things like that. So we have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, we also do. So there's some videos that are, like Sarah mentioned, the how many definitions of folklore can we say in a minute video, which was really fun to do. And those are silly, but also informative.
Yeah.
But we also do a couple more serious videos. The last image on there is one of our theory videos where we talk about, we grab one of our favorite folklore books and do a very brief synopsis of what the book is about and why we love it, and where you can find it and stuff like that, and try to get some more attention to these really amazing folklore books. So every single one of these social media platforms, I think we try to strike this balance between silly and funny and ridiculous things and more serious folklore scholarship, and that seems to be the balance that people really are looking for from us. They really like both, but they don't want one or the other. So we try to use social media in a way as a way to foster this particular community that loves both kinds of things, I guess.
Which is lucky, because that's what we want to do too. Like, I don't
Exactly.
think we wouldn't have kept going for almost 5 years if we had to be like very, very serious all the time. Like, we just would have been exhausted. It wouldn't have been fun, and we wouldn't have stuck with it. But at the same time, we don't really want to, make a million videos or do lectures where we don't talk about anything real either, because we're really passionate about folklore. We love teaching it. We love sharing it with other people who love folklore and want to learn. So social media in particular has been a great way to sort of explore the tension between those two things, sort of the magic and the folklore, as Steve and Dee Dee were talking about at the end of her talk.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to note too that that social media has really shaped what Carter Hall has become as well. That first lecture, or the first series of lectures that we did, the sort of pilot class, was mostly pretty serious. It was very much like, this is, some folklore associated with Halloween, and we're going to talk about this, and this, and it was we recorded it in advance, and we re-recorded parts that we thought we didn't sound quite right, and as Carter Hall has developed, social media has really the feedback that we get on social media has really shown us that people like it when we're a little more laid back, when we're a little silly. They don't mind when we're live and do different kinds of, like make a mistake, or like say something in a silly way, or say ums or something like that, and we don't have to worry about that as much, and the feedback from social media has really helped us develop a style for Carter Hall that really works for people and really works for us too.
Yeah. 1000%. All right, next slide, please.
Yeah, and so, so thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate being part of this panel, and we look forward to any questions you may have.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting us to talk here. Thank you to Steve and everybody else at the Library of Congress. It's really an honor to be here and among these other just incredible panelists as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Brittany and Sarah. It's always good to see you guys. And so I do have one question to sort of touch on some of the things that you said. And it's also a question that has been posed in the Q&A in one form as well, which is about this idea of sort of gatekeeping what folklore actually is, and how important you feel it might be to curate what goes on your social media channels, in the sense that, you see both on, in all kinds of groups, people will post memes that say things like, Irish folklore says that so-and-so, and it's not a real thing. It's just something that someone made up, but wanted to make it sound more authoritative. And I mean, it's wonderful in a sense, because it is what we would call meta folklore, right? It's using folklore as an attribution, which is something that is part of folklore, like, a wise man once said, in order to make this statement seem like it's something other than what it is. So it is folklore in that sense, and yet it's not correctly identifying the true history of of the item. So to what extent do you feel like it's your responsibility in your lists and your groups to um, contribute some curation and some definition to what folklore really is and what it would mean for something to be part of folklore?
That's a really good question, and something that we have navigated and honestly changed our policy on a little bit over the years, because frankly, we were sort of wearing ourselves out when we first started the Facebook group in particular. Every single post that someone would make, if they linked to a super long article or magazine thing, we would feel obligated to go through, read everything, fact check everything, and then reject it, like either with commentary or accept it and then leave commentary on there. And like, we just can't do that. Like, it's already a full-time job running Carter Hall, and we don't actually have a big team. We have a wonderful virtual assistant who helps us out for 2 hours a week. And other than that, everything you see is just us. So we can't. And basically we were running up against some issues of burnout and had to decide to tweak our rules for, which we make everyone read before they join any of our Facebook groups. And it says that, we can no longer personally vouch for everything that shows up. We do our best to glance at it, make sure nothing super egregious goes up, but we can't be held personally responsible for anything that might be in something that someone else posts. When it comes to stuff that we post ourselves or that we say, we're we do our best to be very meticulous. It is important to us, which words are used. We always define things like folklore, legend, myth, fairy tale. Like that's like, we would shrivel up and die, I think, if we didn't do it just after surviving grad school. But there's a big difference between what we say versus what other people, I think, say in our social media sphere.
Right.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Brittany?
The only thing that I would add is also that we have a little bit of wiggle room here because we are the School of Folklore and the Fantastic.
That helps.
That helps a little bit because we make no in the title of our school, we make no claims that everything we post is going to be 100% authentic or anything like that. We have posts about things that are folklore-esque. We have posts about the things that are just strictly fantastic and maybe just vaguely related to folklore, and that stuff is okay within the context of the community as long as it's identified as such.
It's a really good point, Brittany.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, that's another interesting thing, of course, is what people choose to link up with folklore. So when I went to grad school, I was in a folklore and folklife department. At UCLA, they have a folklore and mythology department, and you guys are a School of Folklore and the Fantastic, and all of those have different ramifications for what is going to be included in the book. So
they create different umbrellas. Yeah.
Right. So thank you once again to Brittany Warman and Sarah Clito, and we are now going to take, as I said, a brief break during which we'll play a little segment of our own podcast. So you don't have to leave your screens. You can listen to what we're playing, but you also may leave your screens and wander around, do anything you need to do for about 5 to 7 minutes. And then we'll be back with Andy Pachora. Thank you. Welcome to the Folklife Today podcast. I'm Stephen Winnick, a folklorist at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress and the creator of the Folklife Today blog. I'm here with John Fenn, the head of research and programs at the center.
Hey folks, it's summertime, and we thought we'd do an episode on summer songs to go along with our winter songs episodes from several months back. Just like winter songs, the American Folklife Center has a lot of great songs on summer themes throughout our collections.
That's right. We have some favorites, and we've asked a couple of our staff members to come along and talk about their favorite archival recordings of summer songs.
And I wonder if you'd like to get us started, Steve.
I would love to. I brought along a song called Wild Mountain Thyme by an Irish group called In the Willows. The first words of this song are, "The summertime has come." And it's got a very interesting history. It's related to an older song called The Braes of Balwither, which was published back in the early 19th century by Robert Tannahill. But it was significantly adapted in the 1940s by an Irish singer and bagpiper from Belfast named Francis McPeak. The McPeak family says that Francie, as he was called, rewrote the lyrics to reflect his own life, and especially the loss of his first wife and his ultimately remarrying, which is in there in the song as, "If my true love she were gone, I would surely find another." Now, in the early 1960s, Pete and Toshi Seeger did a tour in which they filmed traditional folk music all over the world. And at the end of that tour, they visited Belfast and filmed the McPeaks, including Francis I, but also his son, Francis II, and his grandson, Francis III. And Toshi captured this song on film. And that film is in our collections in the Pete and Toshi Seeger film collection. Then in 2007, Francis III, who had been in that session with the Seegers about 45 years previously, joined us at the Library of Congress with his son, Francis IV, and their band. And I was privileged to interview them about this song, and they also played the song for us. So be sure to visit the blog at blogs.loc.gov/folklife and look for summer songs to hear those versions of Wild Mountain Thyme.
Wow, that's quite a multi-generational tale bringing us into this tune. But what about the recording by In the Willows? How did that come about?
Well, as you know, we've been running Archive Challenge showcases at Folk Alliance International for many years. The idea is that individual artists or groups select an item with a connection to the archive, they arrange it, and they perform their own version in a special showcase at the conference. So In the Willows chose the McPeaks' 2 recordings of this song, and this performance was recorded in February 2018 in Kansas City with Jennifer Cutting and me as the MCs.
Great, let's hear it.
All right, welcome back. And this is once again the American Folklife Center Symposium, Traditional Folklore in a Digital World, and we're talking about social media. That was a brief segment of the Folklife Today podcast, which you can find at loc.gov/podcasts. And I've been asked to announce something which I keep forgetting to announce, which is that these sessions are being recorded. And last week's session, which was on podcasts, is currently undergoing captioning, and it should be online in a number of weeks, probably about 2 weeks. You should be able to find it on the Library of Congress website. So if you missed it, it won't be too long before you can see it again, but you can't see it quite yet. And that will be true of this one too. When it's over, we will put captions on it and put it online at the Library of Congress website. So all you would need to do is go to the main Library of Congress website and search for something like Traditional Folklore in a Digital World, and you should get these panels as part of your results. So we are going to continue, as I said, with Andy Pachorek of Folk Horror Revival. And I'll just mention that, again, I've been part of the folk horror revival community for some time. Folk horror, of course, is itself a sort of folklore-esque category, as we've been talking about today. It combines folklore with other kinds of ideas and genres. In particular, it is largely thought of as a film genre. Films such as The Wicker Man and that Witchfinder General and that sort of general genre of movie that draws upon folklore quite a bit. Another big area that I've seen people discuss and that's been important to me is music and the sort of folk horror aspect of music, murder ballads, and where that tradition can also bleed into what we would think of as fantastic or horrific sort of subject matter. So Andy Pachorek has been a master of spinning out the conversations about this on Folk Horror Revival, as well as through related media that have come up since the Facebook group was started, including Word Harvest Press, in which word is spelled W-Y-R-D, so it's sort of halfway between weird and word, which is perfect for a press dealing with this kind of material. So I'll just mention that Andy is an artist and writer who describes himself as being drawn mainly to the worlds of myth, folklore, symbolism, decadence, curiosa, anomaly, dark romanticism, and otherworldly experience, and fascinated both by the beautiful and the grotesque and the twilight threshold consciousness where these boundaries blur. So that is one of Andy's descriptions of himself, but I will let him continue and describe himself even more. So Andy Pachorek of Folk Horror Revival.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this excellent panel. I'm really honoured and humbled by that. Before I talk about the destination of Folk Horror Revival and the associated projects, I think it's probably a good idea to look at the journey there. So what got me interested in those areas in the first place, and fittingly for a library talk, it's books, and fittingly for the conversation of folklore, it's storytelling. So go back, rewind a decade to a few. It's the 1970s, and I was quite a precocious child, really into books and reading from a very early age. And one of the things that captured my mind at that point was a series of books called Ladybird books, and many of them were fairy tales. This one, as you can see, is about Greek legends. And another thing is that I was born and brought up in the north of England, but my mother was Italian and my dad was Polish. And when it came to them telling their own stories, I remember my mum telling me about her own ghost granddad and the village werewolf from where she came from in Italy, and of my dad telling me about his own mother's experience with a wild woman in the forests of Poland. And I used to, although I could read the books myself and stuff, I used to get my dad to read the Ladybird books to us, so I could laugh at his accent when he was reading them, all the words, the way that he would say them. But the book that really kind of shaped my world is this one, Mysteries of the Unknown, Monsters, Ghosts and UFOs. Now, this isn't me original copy. I had to replace it because when I was getting some renovation work done in the house before, I put my original one in a safe place. 4 or 5 years later, I still haven't worked out where the safe place is, so had to replace it. But this book really shaped my mind. It shaped my future art as well. And the other book I got around the same time was this one, which is by Alan Frank, and it's Monsters and Vampires, and it's about horror films. Up until about the mid-70s it covers. So there's a lot of like universal horror in there and Hammer horror. And a point worth making is that people of my generation grew up with things like horror films being shown on the TV. Every Saturday night, BBC Two would show 2 old horror films. So you'd get the Universal Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, and other channels on a Friday night, fair on Friday, you would get things like the old Hammer and Amicus films. And that really, I was really into that. From the more mythic folkloric side, there was programs like Monkey, which was a Japanese TV show, which was the story, The Journey to the East. And that was full of like Japanese demons and stuff like that. So I learned about like the Buddhist tales from that TV show. And I remember at school when the teachers were teaching us about Norse mythology, that I'd already heard some of them stories through reading comics. Marvel's Mighty Thor comic actually adapted some of the old legends into their stories, so it was really familiar at that point. And so I was rather like the child Mark on the film and book Salem's Lot, Stephen King's adaptation of that, with interested in the horror things and having all being interested in movie makeup, things like that. But turns out that, and also the fear of Danny Glick knocking at the window, if anybody remembers that. I had my brother and sister were quite a bit older than me, and they used to love scaring us. And I think I just ended up loving being scared. And I shared a bedroom with my brother, and on a night time, he would like tap on things, and he would say it was like Danny Glick at the window. And if you've seen Salem's Lot or read it, it's where this child vampire comes back to try and convert his friend. So that kind of messed with my head a bit as well. But not alone in being like that, because people of that generation X rated, in Britain, particularly through the writer and broadcaster Bob Fisher, he redubbed them the haunted generation. And it is really the 70s, everything, bags of crisps, chips, ice lollies, all had horror themes. TV was just full of science fiction and horror and anything that would, like, you know, today probably not be considered suitable for children. And so that had a big effect. The first film I remember going to see at the cinema was the Ray Harryhausen film Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. The first art exhibition I remember going to as a child was the models from the Ray Harryhausen films, an exhibition which is still going strong today and going to different galleries. So that was my childhood pretty much shaped for what was to come. The teenage years, again, horror didn't really go away. I grew up through the age of the video nasty, which in Britain, there was a social scare about films such as The Evil Dead, The Burning, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, things like that, and they were banned. It was kind of equivalent to the fear in the United States in the 1950s, where loads of horror comics got took off the shelves and even burned. I don't think there was any burnings of the videos that I know of, but really it was a colossal fear that as if watching one of these films would turn you into some kind of monster or something. So there was all that growing up. And it all stuck with us, all stayed in there, influenced what I was doing as an artist. Following art school, I actually ran away with the show folk literally. I became a carny and I joined a travelling fun fair. The difference with this fun fair was that it was traveling from country to country, and the time that I was on it, we were traveling across Asia. So there's certain things there which are really interesting from a folklore point of view, and which did go on to produce folklore revival and influence my later work. There was a girl who worked on the fair who had jet black hair, dyed her hair jet black, always wore black clothes. Sort of gothic fashion, but she wasn't actually a goth. But in the Philippines, this was quite unusual for them to see, I don't think, particularly in some of the smaller islands. And I overheard some locals refer to this girl as Wok Wok. I was like, what's that mean? So I started talking to them, asking about this, and translated really as Witch of the Night. And then talking into it further and with other local people, they told us about Aswang, about different creatures from Filipino folklore. And it all kind of stuck in there. I found it fascinating. When the fair went to Oman, I was managing a game that had, the toys were the Warner Brothers Looney Tune Tasmanian Devil. And he was wearing leather jackets and different things in these toys, and we had a variety of sizes. And again, it was something that was unfamiliar to a lot of the local people. And one man came up and he was like pointing at these Tasmanian devils, and he says, we have these people living on the interior. And talking to him, it became about that he was telling the stories of wild men that lived in the deserts in the Arabian Peninsula. So again, that was really fascinating. When I left the fairground, one of the first jobs I did afterwards was as a research assistant for a magazine called Bazaar. And I later on went on to become like a freelance writer for them, doing things like that. But one day they just needed a filler, and they had these like top 10 slots, which could just easily be put in to fill up a page. And I thought about, what about 10, like top 10 alternatives to the bogeyman, or the bogeyman, as you might say over there. So this was the age when the internet was really kicking off more to be available to more people, and that just going on there and putting things in and finding it was amazing. So I did that, I did the article for them, but it really clicked something inside my head, and I went on to continue to research folklore from different countries more and more, and the myths and the legends. And I was particularly, not exclusively, but particularly drawn to the darker creatures. And that then as well, to supplement income, I was doing different part-time jobs. I worked as, well, I ran the education service for one of the country's wildlife trusts, the local one, Durham Wildlife Trust. I was working in different museums and galleries, and also doing youth work. And all of these jobs involved aspects of storytelling. And a lot of the time, these stories would relate back to different folklore, either local to the particular places or to the items that we had in museum collections, or to the natural world when working with the children, telling them different folk beliefs and superstitions about magpies and bees and things like that. And again, it all went in there. And eventually it manifested as producing my own books. This was the first one, Strange Lands, a field guide to the Celtic and British Otherworld. And it initially started off as just going to be an art project, just doing the illustrations. But I wanted to do as many of these folkloric creatures that I could. And I had this pile of books, this pile of old books around us, and I like flicking through them, referring one to the other. And I thought, well, you know, it'd be handy if I just had the one book. And that is basically what I endeavored to create there, which then led on and will lead on to further ones in the series. This one, Black Earth, a field guide to the Slavic Otherworld, found it really, really difficult to find translations and examples of different things from Slavic folklore. But that's where the internet and social media came in handy there. I could talk to people from the Czech Republic online. I could talk to my cousins in Poland online. You could search things out and you could find texts which hadn't been translated, but Google Translate existed at that point. Pop it into there and it opens up more and more doors. So that's really helped, the social media aspect of that. And also I made contacts online as well for people to work with. And this is one of the books which I've done with the Irish folklorist, Dr. Bob Curran, who's got loads and loads of books out on his own. And he's in his 70s now, but he's an absolute workaholic. He just doesn't stop at all, doesn't stop writing. And he keeps coming up with like more things to do. And I'm like struggling to keep up with him to do the drawings for his text. We are currently working on a book about marine folklore and myths and legends, which has been really good fun to illustrate. Following that, we've got one on urban stories, which will relate to the evolution of folklore in the digital age, because you do have things which come up through there. There's Slender Man, which was mentioned the other week. There's things like the Momo Challenge, all sorts. So you get things like the haunted computer, various different things. So that one's going to be interesting to work on. But as well as that, so I've still got this interest in horror films as well. And the kind of the place where the boundaries blur on that would be folk horror. It's too convoluted to go into depth here about what folk horror is, but there is a lore aspect to the folk horror subgenre. And at the time I was looking online and there was a handful of websites which just talked about a few of the more well-known films. There was Adam Scoville's excellent website, Celluloid Wicker Man, and he's very, very insightful on that subject, as he is on a lot of film. He really knows his stuff. But wanting to know other people's ideas, things like that, and there wasn't really anything to find on Facebook. So again, if it doesn't exist, you create it. So folk horror revival came in at that point. I thought, okay, I don't want it to be folk horror remembrance. I don't want it to be just a thing where people talk about the same 3 or 4 films or whatever. I want this thing to be more than that. I want it to be a creative platform. I want it to be a social gathering place. And it really really took off really well. People who joined, if they were artists, were encouraged to share their artwork. If they were writers, to give us links to their books. Musicians, whatever. We didn't just want it to be about horror films either, because folk horror is about a lot more than that. As I said, it was convoluted. It would take in totally different things, from horror films to things like new nature writing, from music to artwork. Right across the board, we wanted to know what people were doing and to take it forward, that it would be a revival. And it really took off really surprisingly fast. Within just setting it up, and it was filling a gap as well in some sense, because since then the interest in folk horror has really escalated. Within a short while of setting up the group, myself and Adam Scoville, who was a founding member of the group, and Darren Charles, a radio broadcaster and witchcraft historian, we were invited to go and talk at Cambridge University, which was like kind of a bit of a big deal to cut your teeth on, really, but was really good, and kind of got the bug for it then. So we thought, well, you know, maybe we could put on an event ourselves. Another one of our founding members worked at the British Museum in London, and we thought, we're not going to get that, you know, but test the water and stuff. He was interested in doing it, so he talked to his, like, the management there, and they were really up for it. And we were really surprised by how well it took off. The tickets sold out really quickly, but we had an amazing lineup. We had the actor Ray Shearsmith, we had the occult writer Gary Lachman, the psychogeography writer Ian Sinclair, Adam Scoville, and another one who was on the bill, which would probably be of interest to the people who were talking last week, because Alan Lomax, the music archivist and historian, we had his one-time lover and fellow traveller, Shirley Collins, speaking as well. She'd been quiet for years, no new music. She premiered her new video, a new version of Death and the Maiden, at the event. But more than that, she sat and talked on the stage, and she was amazing. She was such a good guest to have. And then to open a panel up and sit up on the stage alongside these people was really surreal. And we went on to do further events at Edinburgh, at Wakefield, at Whitby, on the coast of the northeast coast of England, famous from the Dracula book as being where he landed. Famous in its own right for the Whitby Jet, for the Abbey, and a really beautiful and very thin place that has such an atmosphere, especially in the depths of winter when it's really, there's not many people around. You go in summer and you can hardly walk because you just sort of cattled in with people. In the winter, you can walk quite a bit and not see another soul. And it had a special atmosphere. COVID allowing, we've got plans ahead for doing another event in Whitby again this year. I've stepped back from that side of folk horror revival, and also from the Facebook side a bit, because well, I was ill for a while and I needed to do that, and also because I was looking into other sort of sidelines of taking it forward. So other projects which have come out of it has been Weird Harvest Press. Our first book, Field Studies, was in part because you would get people coming onto the group and it would always be the same question: is this folk horror? Is that folk horror? And it's, as I said, like in the introductory essay, that if you want to build a box the exact shape to fit folk horror into, then you'd be just as good like building a box for the mist or for clouds or for something like that, because it's sinuous. There's certain aspects of it, which Adam Scoville in the folk horror chain pointed out, so could point people into the right direction, but it is fluid. So in a lot of cases, it is open to personal interpretation, and it's one of these things that you might not be able to describe it but when you see it, you recognize it. And again, so we looked at different aspects of it. Some people would say that folk horror is a British phenomenon, and it isn't. It totally isn't. Some of the strongest examples of the first big folk horror wave are British cinema, like the films that you mentioned, The Wicker Man, Witchfinder General, Blood on Satan's Claw. But you look into different cultures and the lore and the myths and the legends, and there's a lot of dark tales from across the world, and which have been put into novels and films and short stories as well. In here we have Japanese examples, we have Australian, American, North American. We talk about things like the Southern Gothic as well. Films like Night of the Hunter, and things which fall more closely into the basic idea of folk horror, things such as The Crucible, Crowhaven Farm, Harvest Home, Dark Secret of Harvest Home, things like that. So it isn't just a British thing. The more you look into it, the more international it is. And really the first folk horror film arguably would be the Danish-Swedish film Haxen, which was in 1922. So, which was filmed in a documentary style, but was one of the earliest docudramas. They really went to town on the aesthetics. It's a beautiful film. It's silent film, but you know, you can turn off the narration on it. And there has been different narrations over the years, including by people like William Burroughs have recorded versions of it. But you could knock it off and put on whatever music you want to, and just read the panels and just fall into it, because it's way ahead of its time. It's risky. It's dark. It has a very gallows humor to it as well. So that's a really good example of how long folk horror's been around, and it's hit a new wave. There's a new revival now, and there's a lot of new films come out. But with doing these books, and this one is a transcript of the British Museum event, and this second big fat one that we did, and we have quite a few more, is poetry. It's all poetry, and I thought, I don't know if we're going to get like many people sending the poems to us, you know, to make it viable as a book. If not, we'll just stick the poems on the social media. That put some work putting that together. So that's really good to see how it isn't just the traditional idea of horror films, how it has branched out into other things. And with these, we didn't know whether we'd sell 10 copies, 1 copy, or whatever. And we had a lot of people contribute work to them. So what we did from the offset, taking our key from another creator, Andrew McGuigan, who put together a series of illustrated books called Cumbrian Cthulhu, which was taking the H.P. Lovecraft mythos, but taking it to the English Lake District, and had quite a good interest gained from that. And he decided to give all the money from the sales of the books to the Air and Mountain Rescue in the Lake District. And so with these, we thought, well, any money that we make on the books, we will donate to a charity. And the charity I chose was the Wildlife Trust, because I used to work for them, and I know that any money given at the grassroots level goes into that direct project you want to contribute to. And on their website, they have lists of ongoing projects that they're doing at the moment, which you can donate to. So to make it more of a social media experience as well, using the Facebook group, what we would do on there is have a poll of all the well, not all of them because there was too many to choose, but of a selection of the wildlife conservation projects that were going at the time. So people could vote for which one they wanted the money to go to, and the money would go directly to that. It wouldn't go into some big pot for a Christmas party or anything like that. It would go exactly where it's saying that it's going to go to. And that's been really good. And through that, we've like made thousands of pounds for charity. But through the people buying the books, it's not just the sake of them donating to a good cause, because it's a very good cause, but they are getting, you know, I'm biased to say, but they are getting very, very good books as well for the money. Another set of books, had to come out in 2 volumes, put together by Jim Peters, another one of our folk horror administrators, is Harvest Hymns, which relates to the music. It looks at traditional ballads, murder ballads. It looks at various different folk stars. There's interviews with different people, Maddie Pryor's, for example, but also it takes it into the more modern experimentations with folk and with the idea of folk. So one of our proofreaders is Graham Malkin, who is a musician whose most famous venture was called The Hare and the Moon. He's doing things now with Widow's Weeds, and his work's very, very folklore based, and it's very dark and it's beautiful. So it's definitely worth checking out if it's unfamiliar to people, because it's haunting. It's a really, really interesting direction that folks took. And also we have interviews with hauntology that comes from Music Concrete and through the BBC Radiophonic Orchestra, the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, and into modern labels like Ghostbox, which is electronic music, but a lot of these artists have a folk sensibility and they have folk roots, even though the music is orally changed quite considerably. So we've took it in various different directions there. And with the side projects which are ongoing is Urban Weird Project, which is looking at law and the influences of it in a more modern setting, in a more urban setting. So you get the urban legends, you get the things which arise virally on the computers, but you also take it back to traditions which aren't strictly folk horror, but have threads of connection. So you will have things like looking into the poltergeists, haunted houses, spiritualism, Ouija boards, things like that. All sorts. I've lost my thread on what's in there. It's just so much. And the second side project, which I'm currently really involved with at the moment, is took it more back to my own personal roots and where I'm from. It's called the Northumbria Ghost Law Society. And what it is, it's looking at the north of England and just over the borders into Scotland, but also down the line of the country. There's a little bit that goes a little bit further south, where there's a backbone of hills called the Pennines, which are the Pennines are very known for being window areas of strange happenings, hauntings, plenty of UFO sightings across the moors and stuff, but also famously have things like the Pendle Witches, which happened in areas of the Pennines. So I'm looking at that, but again, using the social media aspect of it and asking for people to tell their own stories, relate the old famous ones again, but bring in new law, gather new law. And we just set up a blog for that. And the idea is also when time allows, when it's safer, to have people meet up and go to these places, or to meet up in haunted pubs
Mm.
and like experience both kinds of spirits.
So Andy, we're getting close to the end of our time, and we want to
Mhm.
give people a chance to ask questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So have you covered all the projects that you wanted to tell us about?
Yes, just the one last point would be like the through doing the groups, there has been a social aspect as well, not just social media. People have made good friends and good relationships out of it, which is a real good bonus to it. From Folk Horror Revival, we've had at least one wedding so far where the people met through the groups. So it's been
Great.
life-changing for them.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andy. Once again, Andy Pachorek of Folk Horror Revival. And now we're going to turn it over to questions. And as I said, we've had the questions already asked in the Q&A. And so some of our staff will come on to present those questions. And I will say that the questions we don't get to, we are going to get a record through Zoom of those questions. We will send them to the panelists, and they may be able to answer them for you. We can't guarantee what they'll do, but we'll hope that they might send you an email with some answers if we don't get to your question. So we'll begin with the questions now. I believe Michelle and Thea are ready to ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll ask one. This is really for everybody. Sarah and Brittany kind of alluded to it earlier. You all work on a variety of different platforms, and it takes an enormous amount of time and budgeting your time and using it. So wanted to ask you, there was a question about how do you keep yourself from being stretched too thin? And I guess connected to that, there was also a question about how you judge success in the use of these platforms. So there's sort of those two questions. How do you keep yourself from being spread too thin? And on these platforms, how do you judge your success on them? Maybe we can start with Andy.
All hands on deck. Really, the best way to get things done is not to try and take everything on yourself. I've learned in the past that you sometimes need to step back and let other people do things. And with something like Folk Horror Revival, there is so many different aspects of it. It's a case of finding right people for the right roles. Katie Myers and Darren Charles have took over the main running of the things, and one of our editors on the books, Richard Hing, runs our Twitter account, which again gets a lot of people coming in and a lot of interactions. So basically just try not to do too much yourself and enjoying things. If it becomes more of a strain than a pleasure, then you know you need to kind of branch out a little bit.
Didi?
I definitely echo everything Andy's just said. We have, as I mentioned, a really great team. But when we started, it was just Willow and I, and then we gradually started getting guest hosts. We had Celine come on board, and then we grew the team from there. And it was very difficult at first, I think, to manage everything and know when it was important to start getting more people on board and branching out. And I think at this stage now, we feel like we implement the systems and then get other people on board to help run things that way. In terms of measuring success, I did have a peek at the chat, and I know the question was about, how do you measure success with things like analytics? I think for us at first, you always get that social media hit when, we've got, 5,000 followers, we've got 10,000 followers. And we used to share, a little banner, 10,000 followers. And I think now it's always nice to see the followers and the page views on the website and track all of those things. It's always really nice to get feedback from readers and from the community. But I actually think the thing that most felt like success to me, which is a little bit cheesy really, we had one guy who came on to our Facebook page and he was absolutely heckling and really argumentative. And I explained how we approach things. And he went off in a huff, and I thought, well, you can't win them all. 3 months later, I found him on the site defending Folklore Thursday and our approach to somebody else who was causing issues there. And I thought, that's a win, because that's somebody that's now onboarded to how we're looking at things and what we're trying to do. So I think there's different types of success within this. And I think sometimes it's just seeing somebody who's been isolated make friends, or somebody who feels like they haven't got a voice in terms of the folklore they're sharing, find that they've made a blog, and those kind of things. So success is different, I think, for different things.
Thank you. And Brittany and Sarah, do you want to?
Sure. I literally set a timer because it's easy to let, I could respond to social media comments all day, and I can't. Again, we don't have a team. It is us. So if I will occasionally set a timer on my phone for 15 minutes, do 15 minutes of social media, and go back to whatever else absolutely has to get done work-wise that day. As for success, yeah, I love what Dee Dee just said. That's so perfect. You can make yourself feel really, really bad chasing numbers, especially when you first get started. I think it's really easy to fall down a rabbit hole or just focus on the next 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. But I mean, ultimately, I really don't think that tells you that much. I love seeing, I think the success for us in a lot of ways is getting personal comments from people when when we send them an email where they're like, oh my gosh, yes, I get this, you see me, you get why this folk narrative is important to me, stuff like that. I think that just makes me so happy. And I think that's very much how we've learned to measure success.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tearing up just thinking about it. It's like getting a really, really good teacher evaluation at in academia. It's like that. We have a folder in our business email account that's just called Yay, and it's letters like that so we are reminded, so we don't get caught up in the numbers, so we don't get caught up in the minutia of analytics or anything like that. Those letters are the most
everything.
Important. Yeah.
Yeah.
We also got another question that I think can be posed to everyone about the impacts or the changes that may happen to traditions. And the questioner was mainly speaking about musical traditions, but how social media may change traditions. Just in terms of how they're promoted, how artists themselves, storytellers, what have you, are migrating more and more to promoting themselves online. And so just maybe your general thoughts on the interface between social media and traditions changing, maybe not for the best. Would anyone want to start, or shall I? How about we start with you, Dee Dee?
It's always that awkward moment when no one knows when to speak. Thank you. It's a very contentious moment, I think, and I think it's a very personal thing as well. People have very different opinions about this. I mean, you see fairy tales being rewritten continually, and you've got people like Angela Carter, who is now lauded as doing amazing things in her retellings, and then you have people on social media who have these groups where they're retelling things, and obviously it's not something I'm personally as familiar with music, but a lot of people are sharing their own interpretations of songs, things that come to mind quite randomly, or like the pirate folk songs, and things are being put to heavy metal, and they're really morphing. And I think there is one actually, the Merseburger charm, it's worth looking up on YouTube, it's an incantation, and it's actually been put to heavy metal music, and I will admit to listening to that quite often. Some people are doing really fabulous things, but it depends how you view them. I mean, is it lovely? Is it not lovely? Is it almost sacrilegious? I haven't got an answer for that, I'm afraid. I don't think anyone has a solid answer that they can say is any kind of truth. I think it's very specific to each case, and I think it very much depends on the observer and whether they're a folklore purist and what the intentions are. If you look at the way things are morphing in terms of people are coming with agendas, whether that be the far right or whether that just be self-promotion, or whether you look at people who are changing things for social good, you know, changing the role of women in folk songs or fairy tales. Who's to say whether it's good or bad?
I feel like I have the most folklore-y answer to ever folklore percolating in my brain, which is just that, you know, in folkloric terms, tradition is literally the tension between continuity and change. And if things aren't changing, then it's literally not tradition anymore. So it's going to change, it will keep changing, and we will be here to document it.
Andy, would you want to add anything?
No, I agree with that. I think it's interesting because in the past, by spoken word, you'd have the chain of whispers where things could get changed that way, and that continued. You know, even putting it into the written word, into books and stuff. You can still pick up two different books, look at the same little folk story, and there might be considerable differences in it. And I think that's still, well, I know it still happens even on the internet. Just looking like at a local case here, was a case of a child, like true story child murderess called Jenny Cutthroat. And in a little town near here, there's a grave, and it's meant to be her grave, and there's like folklore around it and around the whole story. But you can hear, like, even though there's things written down on the internet, different people are putting their different versions of it. So even though it's getting catalogued and stuff, then yeah, it's good because the change is still happening. It's still evolving. Folklore's often, in those cases, belong to the folk who's telling the tale. And it's their tale with the little differences. And, you know, if it's not quite the same as exactly what happened, then that's just part and parcel of it. Same with any history, really. Depends on who's telling it.
Thank you. We have another, but all the questions are interesting, and I regret we may not be able to get to all of them. But nonetheless, we have a great question about the pandemic, which we are still in, but just how in general that may have affected your communities, the work that your output, but then also personally, maybe on a creative level, just the, you know, the effects of what we've all been going through and still are. Maybe I'll start out with Brittany.
Sure. I had a feeling you were going to go to me first since I didn't say anything last time. So the pandemic was really shifted how we did Carter Hall in a lot of ways. The biggest change, I think, was a refocusing on what we're trying to do by getting these kind of folklore out into the world, these sort of lessons on folklore. We had a lot of classes before the pandemic that were very much focused on, you know, like sort of more like standard things you would find in academia, like introduction to fairy tales, introduction to British folklore, that kind of thing. And then when the pandemic hit, we sort of found ourselves doing a bit of a shift to thinking more about fairy tales and the real world and how these stories can impact what we do in the real world. So we wound up doing a class called Rapunzel's Circle, Finding Enchantment Through Quarantine, and talked a lot about, you know, Rapunzel in the tower and how we were all in the tower. And we shifted the narrative to really thinking about how folklore can impact your life, how these stories impact your life, and how you can use them to get to, you know, realizations about yourself, about your personal life, about, you know, navigating this really weird time that we're in. And those classes really took Carter Hall to a different level because we went beyond just, you know, just teaching about the tales and about the folklore to teaching about the tales and the folklore, but adding in this other dimension that was really inspired by the horribleness that we were all experiencing collectively. And in doing that, I think we got to draw in other bits of folklore too, which was really unexpected but wonderful. One of the things we added was this concept of doing quests, which was really, really fun, but also a way of engaging with the material in a different way, but also bringing in different aspects of folklore. We asked people to engage with, like, go out and find a story, like go out and collect a family story, go out and make a altar for something, and so these are different kinds of folklore that we really did.
Or something with foodways.
Yeah, something with foodways. Yeah. These were different kinds of folklore that we really hadn't engaged with before. And so the pandemic opened up this new way of engaging with all this material that was really, really exciting for us. So that was one good thing that came out of it, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so we, our background in folklore, we have like a general solid background from our MA in particular, but then from there we really specialized in folk narrative in a lot of ways, and that's very much what was reflected in our early classes. But it's been really, really fun to expand it out into lots of other genres, the way that Brittany said. I'll also add, I think there was another, I don't remember if you mentioned burnout in particular now, or if I read it in the question earlier. But yeah, the struggle is real to the point where, so we had that Rapunzel Circle first class, then we had Rapunzel Circle 2, because people loved it so much and it seemed like we were really still in that moment. And we did that maybe 2 months later. And we thought we were done with just Rapunzel Circle and that whole kind of moment. Pandemic moment. I mean, obviously the pandemic has been ongoing, but we thought that level of support and specificity, we thought the moment had probably passed. We are currently in launch mode for Rapunzel Circle 3, which is specifically on fairy tales and burnout, because the moment is calling for it, is not over. And so we're returning to that format to talk specifically about the struggles of burnout. And we're sharing some of the stuff we've gone through, but mostly it'll be focused on how our students can use fairy tales and other folklore to combat that.
That sounds so rewarding, so useful at this time. Dee Dee, would you want to add anything on how it's been going for you?
Yes, it's been interesting, and I use the word interesting in quotes there. I think on a personal level, I found it harder to concentrate on writing. Willow and I did finish one of our treasury books during the pandemic, and it was a lot harder to concentrate. That's for sure. I think what we found very hard hitting, I think, is actually seeing how individual people are reacting on social media, because it's just kind of like there for you. People have been becoming more aggressive and more emotional, and it was hard for us because we had a lot of amazing website contributors who've written for us before, and they're amazing artists and writers, and they came and they wanted to offer their creative response via the website in the same way that Brittany and Sarah have been doing with their group. And we thought, what do we do about that? Do we give them that space, that platform, to offer a level of hope to people? And we actually had to really look at what people wanted. Why were people coming to Folklore Thursday? Are they coming for hope? Are they coming to engage in those kind of conversations about what's happening to them? Or what we actually realize is people are coming for kind of a sense of normality and a sense of magic. When we actually explored that and started speaking to people and finding out what was important to them. So we actually decided not to engage with the pandemic, to keep that safe space, because there were so many places where people could go to talk about this and express that. So we thought, no, do you know what? We want to keep this as a place where it's just for a sense of escapism and magic, and a little bit of a place where people could get that respite. So we very much focused on that during the pandemic, and we didn't post any articles related to that. And we thought there's going to be time for that after and that healing process. So it is lovely to see that other people and other groups are providing that alternative, because everybody needed different things. You know, everybody had a different response. And when you're dealing with so many people, they're kind of laid bare before you, and this group do this, that group do that. So it's so nice to see people providing different kind of places for them to go and express themselves and get what they need there.
And Andy, any thoughts on how it's been for you?
On personal level, I agree with Dee Dee that you would think that you'll get more work done, but for some reason, that's not necessarily the case. With regards to the social media, again, you can't pinpoint it, because some people will have more time on their hands and stuff, and so they'll engage more, or they'll be looking for some kind of escapism from what's going on. But others will be caught up in what's going on, and obviously putting their attention onto what's happening in the world and in their own life. To take it outside of that kind of personal situation or what we do, we're still in the eye of the storm, no doubt. There's got to be sensitivity and stuff. In years to come, when things normalize more, then it will be interesting looking back on this from a folklore point of view. Because, I mean, if you take like something like 14 Times magazine, they've continually kept an article going about different stories which are happening in the world relating to these things, the conspiracy theories, people inventing their own strange cures, things like that. So it's like with any disaster and stuff, there will be stories come out of it, but it's finding the right time to tell them. I mean, it's only now really that you're getting kind of media of the Japanese tsunami and the stories of the tsunami ghosts and things like that. So, you've got to respect the people's pain and fears and stuff for what's going on at the moment. But in years to come, I think there'll be some very interesting stories and studies about people.
Yeah, and were made available online,
Yes.
automatically by default. Yeah. So I think we're way over, are we, Steve?
Yes, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time, and I will say that this panel was fantastic, and it is, of course, itself an aspect of pandemic culture in a way that we're all here on Zoom doing it this way. And it may be, one of these sort of silver linings in the cloud that we're learning to do things like this more, and thus we can have guests from further afield than we normally would. So we really want to thank all of our guests, Dee Dee Cheney, Andy Paciorek, and of course, Sarah Clito and Brittany Warman, who are a little closer to us physically. Thank you all for your attendance and your great thoughts about folklore and about the sort of all the related fields and related ideas that are out there with folklore. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of the Library of Congress and the American Folklife Center and my fellow staff members, again, Michelle Stefano, Theodosia Austin, Elizabeth Schreiber Byers, John Fenn, and Latarsha Bullard, who is actually recording this for us. Thank you for doing this. We would like to say thank you to the audience. We've enjoyed having you, and we really hope this has given you some food for thought. So let's all go think about folklore. Thanks very much.